Hello, I'm Donald Erskine, joined here with Keith Brown. I don't know if you want to give yourself a wee introduction, Keith.
Well, I'm up here because I was ex-deacon convener of the Trades of Glasgow, and that is the convening body for the 14 trading corporations which have been in existence for 500 or 600 years, many of them. And there's also a very close link with some of the livery companies in London. And at the moment I'm up here because most of these livery companies in London, which is over 100, are coming to Glasgow in June for a weekend where they will see the Burrell, they'll see the Mackintosh Museum, they're going to see the Glen Lee, and they'll be having dinner at the City Chambers. So I'm in the middle of organising a programme for them. That's why I'm up here. But I've got lots of other interests as well.
Fantastic, fantastic. And I think one of the main things we were hoping to speak about today was your book that you've written, Reflections.
Yes, this is something which, I mean, everybody's supposed to have a book within them, aren't they? But I think when lockdown came, I had an idea of trying to write a book, and it turned out to be a lot bigger than I anticipated. And also, I was probably some amazed. A lot of it's from memory because a lot of us keep records, but a lot of mine is from memory, going back to my childhood days, as well as the school days, which weren't particularly successful. Then into business, and I had a number of different business lines, but also my involvement in the livery movement in London and in Glasgow, and also talk about horse racing and cricket and a bit of politics, as I've been in politics and local government. So it turned out to be a lot bigger than I anticipated, but it's actually gone quite well.
Good. And with the book, what do you think your main inspiration was? Was it just having the time because of COVID, or?
I think it was definitely having time to be able to sit down at home at my desk and just reflect back on a life and write different chapters. So it was chapter by chapter, and I was quite pleased to the extent I can remember quite a lot. I think when you're my age, which was 80, in January, your memory starts going. But actually, the memory of 50, 60 years ago is still there. It's the more 10, 20 years ago, we go and look it up, bits of paper. But it worked out all right. And it was a fantastic lockdown project, but it got a bit bigger than anticipated.
Good. And you mentioned chapters there, and it's the book, from what I gather, is split into kind of clear defined sections. Is
Yes.
that how you view life, as having kind of clear defined chapters in it, or?
That's a very good question. I think there's a theme which goes through it, to the extent that both my wife and I are regular churchgoers, and I believe that coming together as Christians is very important. And that someone links into being in politics and local government to helping people who are perhaps less well off in life. And I am a very pro-European. I believe actually working with different countries is the way forward, not being isolated. And that's because that came out also in my business career. To the extent in business career, I was travelling around the world, and therefore for me it's very natural that bring these themes of your own Christian belief, your business belief, your political beliefs into one. So if there was a theme, that would be the theme, yes.
Yeah, because I did notice that each section, each chapter begins with "from." So do you think that was the same thought process, or was that an intentional thing?
I think each chapter is defined, and I think it starts, if you take my business career, it started by being an office boy and messenger, to working up, becoming a managing director in the stockbrokers I was in, then moving on to an American investment bank, and working in a entirely different environment. Working for a UK company and working for an American company is very different, and that opened up some of my European international beliefs, an opportunity to go to different countries, research different institutions, deal with different languages, different people, was a theme, and that was the main ones. But I did two other things as well at the same time. I had 3 jobs at the same time. One was actually working with on the board of London Transport, and I was put in there one particular reason by one of my political friends to improve the facilities for people with disabilities. If you look today, you'll look at the transport companies are much more aware of the needs of people with disabilities. Buses would take wheelchairs. The trains will actually deal with seats and special people with disabilities, or even just need help, right? And actually, I was one of the people that started that. If you see the sign, on a please get this seat for an elderly person. That started in London by me, and that was so well. Then I also served on the board of British Aerospace as the government director. That was entirely different sort of type of business. So I was in finance, industry, and also the public sector. So, and that was a theme that sort of went right the way through. Yes.
Brilliant, brilliant. And I think you've touched on the kind of COVID pandemic, and obviously someone that was born during the Second World War. You've obviously lived through some of the most kind of challenging times in recent history. Do you think you've learned any particular lessons through all of that, or?
I think that one or two lessons you do actually learn. I mean, if you go back and remember that, I was born at a time there was rationing. People worried about sort of food supply. There was rationing, and when my parents allowed to have one joint of meat a week, and we went to my mother would go and buy stuff from the local co-op, which was like tripe and onions, very nice. We never hear of that today. So therefore, people talk about shortage of food. I've lived through that. The other thing I would say that is also the issue of energy, in terms of we have a big energy crunch at this moment of time. But you go back to the 1970s, we were on a 3-day week. The price of petrol had quadrupled in the space of months. So you understand more that of the history of these things, and therefore people don't quite understand it's actually been much worse in the past. And whilst it's pretty tough at the moment, it's been much tougher in the past.
Great. And so how in that sense, how much do you feel where you grew up and how you grew up and where the world was at then kind of shaped you and shaped your life?
I think it did. I mean, I became interested in politics in my as a late teenager, and I suppose one of the things that probably struck me more than anything else, which being in a studio like this, you never believe it, is that the commercial radio was banned. They had Radio Caroline, which was stuck in the North Sea, and one or two other things was banned, and there was a monopoly of the BBC. And one of the campaigns I got involved in was actually free radio up commercial radio, and actually spoke in Trafalgar Square in a big rally, to have commercial radio, released on there for the public, and that's happened. So you read, and there was lots of, and I was brought up at a time also when there was the economy was in a real mess, and there was lots of industrial unrest, lots of strikes unnecessary, and the country was grinding to a halt. So you learn through those things do shape your life as you go forward. So that, I think, is history of politics, or teaches me a lot, and you move through now, and it's very different today. I don't tend to get too involved today because I don't quite understand all of it. But we both, my wife and I both, take a keen interest in politics, and it's discussed a lot at their tables, but I tend to keep my counsel to myself.
Do you not always agree then, is that the...
Oh no, no, she tells me once. No, she'll get hold of the Times and say, well, what do you think about that? So the trouble is she reads it in bed at night time, so I'm just about to doze off.
No, that's great. And if you, I suppose in that fact, you've compared kind of today with when you grew up a fair bit there, and if you could choose and grow up when you did or now, which you think you would choose?
I don't think really chose. It's chosen for us. But I think what people like ourselves have to realise that things have changed a lot, and the views of younger people are very different from the views that we would have when I was brought up. And it's not for me to say what, try and impose mine on them. Things are very different. The way of communicating with people, by way of social media, internet we never had. And I was brought up with a revolutionary fax machine, but now, because it's all internet and you're all on your computers. But I think I like to see young people moving ahead and perhaps looking after me in my old age, and not necessarily being hidebound by what my views are, but understand what they think of the world. I've got grandchildren. I've got grandchildren of your age, so I know the way they operate in their work is entirely different than the way I did. But I think the life is you should actually show by example. Not telling people, just show by example. If you can, this is how I've done things. If you want to follow, fine.
So while you were writing your book and reflecting on your life, is there anything that you wish you could tell your younger self?
I think we can never all be right about everything, right? I've made mistakes on some things, and I think that's probably inevitable. You know, you can't go through life by being right all the time. What you've also got to know is to recognise when you are wrong and correct it. And also, if you offended someone, to apologise. I think that there's nothing wrong with, you know, having failure in a few things, as long as you sort of recognise it and deal with it. But I've been pretty lucky. Most things have gone right, but not everything. And you have to cope with it. Even sort of when you're, you know, simple things when you're travelling, you know. And I was travelling a lot of travelling. The plane is late, and you've got various appointments. You've got to sort of adjust your mind to think, how do we deal with this? And I suppose in some respects, I've been quite lucky. I managed to manage stress. A lot of people find it difficult to manage. I've been able to manage stress and just take a deep breath and get on with it, you know. But that's probably a characteristic I've been very fortunate to have.
Great. So your career is centred around politics and finance. What's your opinion on both the economic and political landscape right now?
I think there were a couple of themes. The first thing I would say is that I've grown up in a world in post-war era, and we went through the release of the Russian, the Poland, the Hungary, these sort of peoples got out of the Iron Curtain, and we see that sort of change. But today, I think the world is actually far more unstable than any period in my life. I mean, you've only got to see it with Russia and Ukraine. It's not just that. And you've also got China bellyaching around the place. When you look at it, the number of democracies are actually sort of declining. The number of actually dictatorships are rising. And even as a sort of reservation about the United States, I can't understand, you know, some of the things that actually go on there. I've been to the States a lot, and we've got friends over there. But I'm not very keen on going now, because I think the place is changing so much. And I think that is the great risk, is that in the world that we are living in a very, very unstable world, the worst I've ever seen in all my life. If you look at it economically wise, my view is as far as economies are concerned, we are not productive enough as a country. We demand a lot of social services. We demand money for schools, for health, for education, for defence, everything. But we're not generating enough income to pay for those. We keep borrowing and borrowing money, and just can't keep actually doing that. And we've got to that stage now. And therefore, if we could actually increase productivity, everybody could work a little bit harder, then I think you could pay for all the things you want to do. And I'm speaking from experience. I work very hard. I work very, very long hours. You know, to sort of, you know, to working at home and distance, that sort of thing, and because work is not on, you know. So I think if you look at it economically, productivity is the key thing. It's probably not just this country, it's other countries of the world. But I think we live in an unstable world at this moment of time. That's a real lesson you have.
Oh, great. And maybe speaking on a bit of a later point now, but you've obviously talked about your kind of horse racing and how it's a keen interest and passion in your life. So one of the main questions I had to ask about that was whether you had a favourite horse from all your years breeding and racing. Is there any standouts?
Well, I think I asked my wife that, because they run in her name. Yes, we've owned horses about 30, 40 years actually. It's a passion of Rita's, and she got me involved in it as well. And we've had quite a few. We've had a few successes with our own horses. Last year we had one running at Cheltenham. It came third in a race there. And to breed a horse, which we've done, our horses breeding go back to the Queen Mother's estate. We bought a brood mare from the Queen Mother's estate, and we just bred them all the way through. And they won quite a few races, some of these, and to actually get a third at Cheltenham was very good. And then another at Aintree was the most recent successes. We've been in a syndicate which won the Derby, of course, called Motivator, and that's one of the highlights. But one of the greatest, to go to a race meeting, which we go, and then to sort of get in the winner's enclosure, either the first or a third, is something that we feel, you know, passionate about, and enjoy so much. But you have to work very hard. You have to work very hard on it. It's a lovely hobby, and in a couple of weeks' time we should be at Cheltenham watching all the races there.
Fantastic. Hope you do well. Another point and another clear passion in your life has been your faith, and it's clearly played an integral role in your life. Do you think that faith is harder to uphold these days in the kind of modern world?
I think it is. It's something I've been brought up with, and something I both deeply believe in. But other people don't hold the same desire. And I think we are moving into a more secular society, and in many cases, people try to undermine religion. I just notice, I don't get involved in politics up here, but I noticed that the lady that's standing as for candidate, she was very religious, right? And she's been penalised for her religious beliefs. But that's terrible. You know, you don't do that sort of thing. You judge them on what they've done in life, and that I find very upsetting, and you see it with other people as well. But I think a lot of the Church of England, which I'm a member of, is at odds over a number of issues. But you've got to believe yourself, and sometimes it's your own personal beliefs are the most important, rather than being told by other people, and that's what I stand for. Yeah.
Great. And I suppose in that regard as well, charities, both your own and others like the Trades House that you've spoken about, are a clear passion, and what kind of led you to them, or was it a case of that you were asked to join them, like you've mentioned, or?
Well, different things. I'll say we're very fortunate that we happen to have a lovely big house down in Essex where we live, and we've always used that for events and raise money for charities. We had balls at our house with 300 people. We have fetes. We have various receptions, and so we always wanted to help local charities. And when I retired from mainstream, we set up a charity called the Frightening Foundation, which our own family. And I think we've probably donated about £350,000 over the last 20 years, which is mainly from sort of the endowment and raising money. So I always believed in helping other people and charities. Up here in Glasgow, I got asked to take on the role of deacon convener, and why did I do it? Because you could see here there was a huge need for support. I mean, Glasgow has got a high level of deprivation and poverty, and Trades House is actually doing a huge amount to do that, but not just the Trades House itself, but the 14 incorporations are part of it, and they're contributing about nearly £750,000 a year to support. We started off, when I was deacon convener, a scheme to help kids who were falling behind in school. They were being looked after by grandparents because the parents had died through drug or alcohol abuse, and those kids getting behind. So we started a scheme of helping them with just extra learning in the evenings or after school. Yesterday, I think the Commonwealth Committee gave about £60,000 to various local charities. Well, that's a tremendous amount of work's been done. I've been very happy to be associated with it. But the role of deacon convener, which I did in 2016-17, embraces both head of a trust and a charity, but also being the third citizen of Glasgow, so you had a civic role as well. But I kept out of the politics to just go along with the Lord Provost and attend all the events. In fact, during my year, I stood in for the Lord Provost at a few events because there was an interregnum. So very strange that someone from Essex should actually making speeches and welcoming people to the city of Glasgow. It was rather bizarre, but it's quite nice.
Very good, very good. Moving on to a kind of different point now, but I think you've touched on this briefly, but life and how we live it has changed so much within the span of your lifetime, as you've touched on, with a lot of technology coming in and everything. But you feel that it was hard for you to adapt to the changes that have come, or?
I haven't adapted to the technology. I think you get brought up on it, and essentially, I mean, when I first started work, there were no electronic calculators. There was a facet machine, just wound it, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, to multiply 1, 2, 3 by 1, 2, 3, and a comptometer, which you did that. And then, of course, computers started coming in. So then, when I was mainly working, I was writing reports. I used to fax where I was in the world. I faxed them over. There was no way of doing it by internet, and I think, and that's why I would say, technology, I'm a bit lost, right? And that, I think, is a disadvantage you have. A lot of people adapt to it, but I think people our age find it very difficult to adapt and rely on grandchildren to actually sort it out for you. But also at the same time, in writing my book, I wrote most of it by hand. I have a secretary who then transcribed it. The reason for that for me is I can feel I express myself much better with a pen, and as I go and think, rather than actually typing it, I'll go backspace it and do that, and you lose the theme. So therefore, I think I find writing by pen or by whatever it is, I find much more satisfactory, and that's really old-fashioned. You know? I mean, everybody else would cringe at that, but the pen is very powerful.
Sometimes old-fashioned ways are best for some of these things.
For me they are, yes.
No, that's great. And how does the world and Britain of today, do you think, compare to that of your youth and what you grew up in?
Well, in every generation, things tend to get better and new things come in. So you can't really compare probably the 1950s with today. Because things are very different. It's just the evolution that goes on, and sometimes actually keeping up with that evolution. You know, the fact is, my father bought a car. It's got 5 years for the car to be delivered, right? But nowadays, you go in and buy it more or less off the shelf, and it took years to sort of develop a car. Well, they develop them very very quickly now, and that's where you have to sort of get too used to the change, and the change is very rapid. I think if we go back to Victorian times, they used to say the rate of change was actually every 100 years, then the Woodin times every 50 years. Now the rate of change is now sort of every 3 or 4 years. And that's a lot for people of older generations to get to grips with. It's much easier for you.
Sometimes.
So I'll be interviewing you next time.
That's fine. And having reflected on life and now looking to the future, which I think you have in the last section of your book as well, but what do you kind of predict for the future and for future generations?
You know, certainly predict for future generations that life will change, and it will change pretty rapidly. I think future generations really need to understand more about how the world economy works. Understand, very easy to say, well, let's give them more money. Where's it going to come from? You know, to understand actually how things actually work, and also to be aware of the dangers of what's happening in the world order. And I think probably more younger people need to get involved, not necessarily involved in politics, but take an interest in politics. You know, to play around with the social media site and everything else without sort of thinking about the broader issues of politics. And I think, if anything, the message is that the younger generation need to understand more what's going on in the world. Don't have to sort of take sides or anything, but just understand what is going on and what the thing is going to influence our lives. And whilst, you know, I'm a pro-European, so I don't approve of Brexit at all. But you cannot be a self-sufficient country unless you're self-sufficient. You have everything you need, your food, your oil, everything. We haven't, so you have to be reliant upon other people in other countries and work together. And but the message really is that people try and more understand about how the world works. And I think probably in the education system we lack that a bit.
Great. And my final question here is there one, maybe writing your books help you kind of pinpoint this, but is there one time, moment or day that really stands out for you as a highlight in your life?
My wife's sitting over there. It's the day we got married. because she has actually, I think in life you need support, and my wife is my greatest supporter. Although that said, she's a pretty good speaker in her own right, so, and she's very critical of what I say. So I shall get a rundown after this.
We'll get her up here next.
Yeah, well, she's pretty good.
That's absolutely fine. That's the kind of extent of my questions. Is there anything else that you feel you've not touched on here?
I think you've done very well. I mean, I know warning all this, so you fired them at me, so you'll make a good journalist.
Thank you. But thanks for your time, Keith.
Thank you.